Hello. Tonight I'm going to be discussing the Moravian contribution and involvement in the American Revolution. Now, the Moravians were a very peaceful, loving people. They practiced being pacifists. So naturally, any involvement they had in actual combat during the war was very minor and always against the actual rules of what they believed in. Although those who did involve themselves primarily for the patriot cause, actually in armed conflict, were forgiven by the church after the war and welcomed back with open arms. Which is interesting to note because that's not always the case in societies that are so exclusive. Now, an interesting thing to notice is that the Moravians were in fact the first Americans to celebrate the 4th of July as a day of American independence. Although independence was not really the reason they would be celebrating. For the Moravians, the fact that America had actually achieved their goal and become their own country wasn't so much important as the fact that the killing had finally stopped. These people just wanted to have peace. And it's interesting to note that this made them really far more involved in their own community and their own religion than it did within the community as Americans at large, which is common during this era. Sectionalism is very common. But the Moravians really took it to another level. With that said, they still were the first people to celebrate the 4th of July. And this is further proven by the fact that they celebrated primarily because of the peace, because they did not celebrate the 4th of July for another 4 years. So for them, this was more of a moment to mark the end of a conflict than a continual day of celebration year after year, treated as a holiday, to recognize the fact that America was now her own nation. With that said, they did welcome then President George Washington gladly into their community, regardless of his past as a military commander, and even let him stay there for a couple of days and gave him a tour of their community, which is interesting that they would include outsiders so much, as this is in common given the exclusive nature of these types of settlements and communities. However, as much as they attempted to keep their traditions inside their own community, this was very difficult to accomplish, as they are not a farm-based or an agricultural-based community, but in fact relied on trade and trade with outsiders, which really would have compromised what they believed in and how they were able to achieve remaining pacifists, which is further proven throughout the course of the war, because they interacted quite a tad bit with the people fighting the American Revolution, primarily the patriot causes. And it is in this instance, specifically with the settlement in Salem, that just further shows how important it is that if you're going to engage in a war, that you have regular, disciplined troops. Because when General Greene's forces arrived in the community, they were largely respectful and left without much of an incident. However, when militia forces entered, you can see the obvious lack of discipline, the fact that they did not treat the people the way they should have. And honestly, this can be expected given the nature of the insurgency in South Carolina throughout the entire war. The fact that this was largely based on personal emotions and the opportunity to take advantage of people who had different beliefs or chose a different side than you is something that we've already learned about. So the fact that they would do the same to the Moravians is not surprising. Now, it's interesting to note that not only did they treat the Moravians far less than they should have, they actually actively attempted to incite loyalist rebellion inside of the community. And the reason for this is likely to justify further reprisals against the community and an opportunity for even more plundering. And it's good to note that the Moravians were actually capable of either recognizing their intentions or simply remain truthful to their personal beliefs. And that's not to say that they wouldn't have personal biases towards the patriot cause or the loyalist cause, because this was something that a lot of Moravians had to deal with throughout the war. With that said, at the end of the day, Their focus was primarily on their religion and their community, and they wanted to avoid the war as much as they could. And this was certainly achieved in this situation because the Patriots weren't given a reason or another opportunity to further plunder the community. And although they did leave with a lot of supplies that they did not pay for, this was given freely and without any bloodshed. And that speaks far more for the Moravians continuing to believe what they believed and truthfully dealing with outsiders than anything the Patriots would have done, because they were undoubtedly very poorly treated by these militia units. And there's just no way to get around that. Now, it's interesting to note that although they did involve themselves with the Patriot cause, didn't really have an issue supplying them with food, alcohol, chances are this largely had more to do with geography than anything else. The Moravians did not largely have a dog in this fight, although they recognized the American victory as providential, which is interesting following the war. But during, as can be seen in certain settlements further north, really who they dealt with had more to deal with who was there than any personal beliefs they had. And on a much smaller scale, they dealt largely the same with British forces in the north. So it's good to note that they stuck to their beliefs and never really left their faith. And that's all I have to say on the Moravian settlement.